welcome to our panel discussion today. We are so happy that you are here. My name is Shelby. I'm a managing partner with Education Elements. We are a national consulting group that works directly with school districts and schools across the country. And I'm joined by my colleague, Gabby, who will introduce herself here in a minute, and a wonderfully esteemed panel of leaders from Newburgh Enlarged City School District in New York. I'm just going to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about our panel, give you some context here, and then we will jump into introducing the panel and jumping right into our conversation. So first, I'd love to tell you just a little bit about Newburgh as a district. They're a relatively large school district in Orange County, New York, seated just on the west bank of the Hudson River. We've been very fortunate to work with them over the past few years to facilitate everything from redesigning the student experience in grades 6 through 8 to responsive leadership practices to strategic planning. But our conversation today centers around work that we started in fall of 2020, where Newburgh wanted to create kind of a new perspective in the district around data culture, what it could be, what they wanted it to be, and wanted to do that with a representative group of what we've called Vanguard team members, which includes administrators, teachers, school support professionals, and district leaders. Before we get too deep into telling you about that work and the story that's happening specifically in Newburgh, I want to take a minute to just address what we mean when we say the term data culture. This is a term that we started using a lot at Education Elements about a year and a half ago around our conversations, specifically related to how districts and schools use information and are able to leverage really the pretty deep investment that we've seen in helping schools collect more data and have more data available to them to make decisions. And one of the conclusions that we were starting to come to is that while there is so much more information available today, that there is still a need to develop human behaviors or practices around how that information is used if we really want it to lead to more informed decisions, more equitable decisions for our kids. And so we worked on a framework that we felt like defines really what those best practices could be. We're calling them the essential elements of data culture. And our work in Newburgh has given us an opportunity to really put those elements in practice and explore how we can help build those practices on the ground level, at the school level, at the district level, in departments. Again, hoping that will provide an opportunity to take all of this information and have it lead to really meaningful decisions for kids and their families. We're showing you that framework here. I'm sure we will talk a little bit more as we get into the conversation today. But I think before we do that, we want to take a minute and share a video with you. It's a short video, but it does a really good job of just kind of setting the stage for this work. And then we will introduce the panel to you guys.
And everyone in the organization needs access to information.
I think data is a picture, kind of defining the large community.
So I'm not sure how many districts in the country launched the new strategic plan during COVID, but we did. And as strong believers of strategic planning, we just knew that there's really no better time than right now to get really intentional about what our priorities are going to be over the next several years in order to be in a position where we can rebound from this pandemic much better.
I think a lot of times people believe data as being punitive because data in New York State has, aligned itself to be somewhat punitive, like in a rating system. But we know as educators that there's so many other factors that determine the success of a district than the test scores.
We could look at data of how students are feeling with the, social emotional part of their life, because in essence, we want to educate the whole child. So data has to be looking at every aspect of our students and just seeing what makes them tick to figure out what we can do to move them forward.
I think data is a kind of a negative word in the district at this point. It's associated with evaluation. We need to change that, which is why we are talking about a data culture, because we have to embrace everyone's perspective on it. But looking at all these different pieces of information to inform what's working and what's not. That to me is the data system.
The more I started to think about Newburgh being an organization that is responsive, and responsive to what and to who, the more I started to realize how much time was being spent on packaging the data versus the strategy and the story work that I would prefer our educators and leaders spending their time. And so I noticed that we lacked some systems. I realized that we needed to build some capacity among various divisions and personnel in order to really move the needle here.
We want to empower individuals to be able to make those informed choices, to really have an understanding what's happening. And we want everybody in the system to understand that and understand how to do it themselves. So it's not just us at district office or the principal of the building knowing and housing and warehousing this data, but it's sharing of it and then teaching individuals how to utilize it to benefit themselves and our scholars.
Teachers obviously use data to drive their instruction. It's constantly just analyzing and seeing how each child does when you ask a question. Whereas, our student support team might look at it and, may ask students different questions, different probing questions, but, it's going to be related on how they feel, what's going on at home, and really just taking all of that out. So all of that data that we are getting from it isn't just the data from the test. It's not just the data of classwork. And you have to look at it from a holistic approach. We want to create a Renaissance child. And that Renaissance child, that Renaissance student is going to have their hands in every aspect in the educational realm in order to be successful.
Component that we have not done in the past was we've included social workers and we've included psychologists and we included a guidance counselor because they're critical in the work that needs to be done to support the whole child. So I think the understanding and the valuing of everyone's role in the Vanguard team has really increased people's understanding of how they play into outcomes for kids. Now they see where they fit into this particular model, whereas they didn't before we started those conversations.
It's not just one person and one person from each building. It's an eclectic team that's going to work together, have a true understanding, and then be able to bring that back to their building.
And I think that it has also helped me to listen to everyone, to say, oh, I like that idea. You know what? I haven't done that. And to recognize that that's something that I may not know. That's something that I may not know how to do. So I'm going to learn from you.
One aha moment that I've had is that I'm not the only one that finds not having a data culture to be a challenge. So there's alignment right now in folks feeling like, yes, this is absolutely a priority, and some really good feedback right now on being part of this work and helping to shape it as we move forward. I can use that information to say, hey, I really like where this is going. The conversations are very, very rich, which they are, or we need more voices from this stakeholder group. And so let's reach out and make sure we're also hearing from them. And there's also a real commitment from multiple levels and people in the organization that feel like, I'm part of something special. So I'm excited every time we come together.
So my hope would be a data culture that is alive, sustainable, aligned, looking through the lens of equity and inclusion, and also responsive.
My hope is that as a result of the Vanguard team, that when we go to implement, that there's already connection and engagement that's been done. So it's not just Roberto giving a speech on the opening day of we're implementing a data culture. It would be teacher talking to teacher, colleague talking to colleague, and embracing it from their perspective. I want to hear it from the teacher. I want to hear it from the kid. I want to hear it from the parent. That's what I think is going to result from this particular process, because we're designing it with these voices in mind and the involvement of these individuals, and then we'll implement.
I hope that the work that we're putting in together now as a part of this team is something that is going to be sustainable, and that we can be a model district, and really to look at it and for people to see how data can be used to drive every decision that's being made in the district. And having that knowledge be our driving force to truly create individuals who are going to be lifelong learners, who are going to be able to take that and pass it on to their next generation.
So I kind of see like all of our goals of the strategic plan are here within our different divisions. But in order for us to live that vision, I see the data as the thread through all of them. That will help us align, because we're going to be saying, okay, well, is it aligned to the data? Does the data show us that that's a decision? And if we keep with that lingo and that language and keep that common thread, I think we'll be more successful.
We have to tell our own story, and we have to rewrite the narrative. And part of focusing on a data culture is exactly that, is that cultures reveal values, mental models, priorities. And there's always going to be competing priorities. But when we can drill down to how we do business in the spirit of supporting children, I'm convinced, whether it's this district or any other district in New York or the country, you'll be far better when you can take a look at efficiency coupled with responsive organizations.
All right. Well, we love that video because we think it does a really nice job of telling the story of what Newburgh has done this past year and engaging and starting on this journey with creating a more responsive data culture. But as many resources as we can put out, as many webinars as we can host, we know the thing that we hear from leaders over and over again is, can we talk directly to the leaders who are doing this work? And so, as Shelby mentioned, we are so excited to have 4 of the leaders who engaged and really led the work that you just witnessed in that video. Joining us from Newburgh right now. So we have Dr. Roberto Padilla. He is the superintendent of Newburgh. We have the deputy superintendent, Ed Forgit. We have Onyx Peterson, who is the chief of pretty much everything. She does information, she does technology, she talks about data. And we also have the executive director of human resources, Sara, Feliz. And pretty much at every level of education, this group really has experience in this idea of thinking about and using data. And so we are just so honored and excited that you can hear directly from them. We are going to kick it right off with some questions that we thought might be helpful as you're thinking about bringing data culture to your own district. But if you are joining us in the live YouTube stream, we always encourage you to bring up or ask any additional questions that you might want us to bring to the panel today. We're going to make sure that we reserve some time at the end to do that. So feel free to engage in that chat and share any questions that are top of mind for you. So we're going to start with this first question, and Dr. Padilla, I'm going to kick it over to you first, if that's okay. But I think in general, one of the first things you said in that video is not many districts would engage in a strategic plan in the middle of a pandemic. And I would add to that, not many districts would think about revitalizing a portion of their culture while they're dealing with all of these other issues as well. And so just thinking about all the things that we've learned over the past 14 months, why the focus on data culture now?
So just a big thank you to at Elements, and especially my rockstar leadership team. I mean, to not make this sound really simple, but why not do it? You know, the pandemic didn't stop priorities, didn't stop the need to support children, the need to support our leaders and teachers. It shifted some thinking, it shifted some practices. But we're building off of momentum that we've had for the last several years. And so, you know, and thinking about, if you kind of look at it this way, when you think of an iceberg, you just see the tip. The real body of the iceberg is beneath the surface, it's beneath the water. And that's how cultures and organizations work as well. And so if we're going to look at this pandemic and think about what post-COVID leadership and post-COVID teaching looks like, then there's really no better time than now, when you're in the middle of a crisis, to begin to think about what your priorities are going to be over the next several years. And that's exactly what we did. But we know what's beneath the surface are the things that people think about. It's how they live their lives. It's how they do their work without even thinking twice about it. And so in many respects, this is what, you know, trying to implement a data culture is all about. It's getting our organization to value, use, be extremely efficient, which we didn't really hit on a lot in the video, but mean, why are we doing all these things? Well, the constant request we hear from leaders and teachers all the time is we need more time. Just because there's so many priorities, there's so many things that need to be done. And it's the one thing we can't give people is time. But what we can do is rethink how we use time, how we use space. And so those were some of the driving, beneath the surface reasons for why we said, let's stay the course. Let's continue to do this very important work. Let's partner with some experts, and let's move the work forward and make it very clear to everyone in our community what our North Star is. Why are we doing this work now, and what the work is going to look like post-COVID.
I love that.
Yeah, go for it.
I love that point. That's really interesting around thinking how a focus on a part of your culture can contribute to efficiency and time use. I hadn't ever thought about it in that way. I'm curious, and Dr. Forgit, I'll come to you with this question. What are some of the other impacts that you're hoping this focus on data culture will bring to you all, especially as you're looking to fully reopen your school district next school year?
So we learned really early on that during this pandemic, we were not in the same environment that we were previous, and that we had to really take a really close look at what was working and what wasn't in the provision of education to our scholars, and what did our faculty and our staff need as that fully remote learning was occurring. We needed to think about all of the different aspects of learning from the perspective of each of those groups, so that we could inform what needed to change upon return to full in-person instruction. So when you looked at what was the data that was available, we were kind of at a loss in some areas for having real-time data. We had to set up systems immediately for how do you take remote attendance? How do you monitor and take a look at the classroom walkthrough data in a fully virtual world? So over the past 14 months, we've really said, how do we take a snapshot and create that snapshot of what's working, what's not working, what are the new gaps that are created as a result of the pandemic, and be prepared to enter into a system that meets those needs beginning over the summer of 2021.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, anyone else on the panel, just as you were thinking about thinking about starting this work, and now that we've gotten as deep into it as we have, anything else you would add to that in terms of what you're hoping some of the outcomes will be?
So I think that one of the things that we believe to be true is that this data culture is going to help nurture all students to take increased ownership and risks when it comes to their learning and their personal choices. And, as Maya Angelou always said, when you know better, you do better. And that's the expectation with our scholars.
I also think that just moving towards this data culture is also going to help us in other areas, especially in our culture responsiveness. If we have the data, we can respond to supporting our students much better. I think that what this process did show us is that there is a need. There is a desire to have an access and a process by which we look at data and how we build interventions. So that was a great thing that came out through this process, and what we can do as district leaders to support our teachers and our administrators in obtaining that data.
Onyx, sort of on that note, something that I know we heard from Dr. Padilla in the video, and we've talked about in some of our conversations is, just the insight that no matter if it was a teacher on the Vanguard team or a district leader, almost everybody agreed that this is an important topic to focus on now. And I know sort of in your role, you touch on a lot of different areas that might sort of build a data culture within a district. So want to maybe start with you for this next question. If you're thinking about the current state of Newburgh, even before starting this process, what are some practices that you already have in place as a district to ensure both accountability, right? Because there are some measures that are necessary for that, but also supporting this idea of a responsive data culture?
I think prior to starting this process, I think the district has done a very good job about setting the expectations in goal setting and looking at data and creating protocols, especially around certain data sets, whether it's our Good to Go system, where we look at academics for our scholars in high school, or if we're looking at attendance and assessment data from many of our intervention programs. I think that we've really had those strives even prior to the pandemic of trying to create the knowledge and how we can access this data and really analyze it and respond to it and support students, and how the different populations, whether it's the teachers or PPS staff, have access, can support academic achievement in students. But I think that very early on, we began to hear that, yes, we have all of this, but it's not something that perhaps we need a better structure around it. So that was very eye-opening to us, and going through the process and hearing what people were doing to get that data prepared and to facilitate conversations. We definitely, I know that Dr. Padilla talked about efficiency and making sure that we made that process efficient for our teachers and for our building leaders, came up for, it was like one of the first things that was really spoken to by the teams.
Thanks, Onyx. This is actually, this question came from a few leaders who attended a previous session we did on data culture. And I think there is this tension of, I need to have some measures of accountability, but I also want to be responsive and leave some room for that agileness, right, that we need in a data culture. So Dr. Padilla, would love to ask you the same question. When you're thinking about some practices that were already in place or that you currently have in place to ensure that accountability and a responsive data culture, what are some of those things that you are already building on?
Yeah, I want to be very transparent. At least for me, accountability isn't a dirty word, but it tends to be a dirty word for all the reasons some of our senior staff mentioned in the video, and what we know to be true all across the country in school districts on how data is leveraged against people. That's not the culture we're striving for, clearly. So we do have a number of things in place. We have periodic assessments for students, so that way we can gauge how well they're progressing along the year. And for obvious reasons, we don't want to wait for an external measure to tell us how well we're doing. And so we're engaging in those kinds of conversations periodically throughout the year. There are certain reports that we require every single month, so that way we have our hand on the pulse, so to speak, where we can kind of check in and see how things are doing. And that ranges from monitoring finances to monitoring attendance to monitoring discipline, among a range of different reasons why we particularly do that. But what's really important here is how ubiquitous are those practices, and are they understood by all people in our district? And right now, the answer is no. Right? There are people doing certain things and there are others doing something different. And sometimes that's okay. And we're not suggesting that we're creating an environment where everyone must be lockstep. That's not what we're speaking about. It's that below the surface, how we think, how we do our business, how we teach, how we lead, how we communicate every day. And just to further make the point here, it's about efficiencies. And I'm looking at people who are spending an enormous amount of time generating reports, identifying, data points. And obviously, in the end, that's not going to be fruitful if a lot of time is spent on that end of this equation where people don't feel efficient. And so when we are better at our efficiencies, we have some consistent structures and systems in place that everyone is aware of, then again, we'll be better for it.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder of where we started this project. If you remember, we did a lot of interviews with people. You all shared a lot of your existing practices around data and resources with us. And we really wanted to first understand what the existing culture was like before we started talking about improving it. And to that point, I think there was a lot of that where we could point to areas of success or really promising practices that were happening at the school level or at the team level. And not at all, just like you said, Roberto, that we wanted to bring those up and say, now everybody has to do this, but there's certainly an opportunity for scaling those and bringing those like pockets of success to the broader team. So thanks for reminding us of, I think, a lot of what we uncovered in the beginning. It gave us a lot to build on as we started doing this work. And I think that takes us nicely into our next question. And Sara, I'm going to come to you first here, which is kind of the other side of that coin in terms of what areas are we still working on? You know, what areas do you think we still need to improve on when it comes to responsive data culture in your district? I think some of these we identified in the beginning and some of them we've learned along the way. So what comes to mind for you?
So we're really looking to shift from having pockets of excellence to having a really cohesive data culture, and inclusion is the key ingredient for this type of cohesive data culture. One of the great things about the pandemic is that it didn't blur our district vision. We know we still want inclusive excellence. And so we've brought many, many stakeholders together, the teachers, the students, the counselors, and everyone's been at the table, and we've heard all the voices of what they need, what they want, how they can achieve both the academic and the personal success. And based on these conversations, we began to develop this playbook with your support, right? Filled with these clear expectations and protocols and a great number of other how-to resources. Currently, I believe that we still need to finalize a rollout plan. We need to look at a benchmark calendar to communicate the project to our full community and then phase it in with implementation. And that includes periodic pulse checks to gauge how things are going, because we can't be linear in this work. And then there's that buy-in factor, right? We've talked a lot about equity. We've talked a lot about inclusion in the district. But now we have to get the full buy-in. And we believe that once the full district-wide community understands the why of this work, why it's so important, why it's so needed, once all the administrators, the teachers, the staff, and the families understand how it will benefit us all and what role each of us plays, then we'll grow the appetite that's needed to catapult to the next level.
Yeah, you're so right. It's one thing to design new ideas and new practices. It's another thing to roll it out and implement it. So I agree with you. That work is ahead of us. I also, love that we're thinking about that and working on that together. Onyx, so much of this work touches your role, and it touches the parts of the district that you are very much kind of accountable for and lead. So what would you say those areas are, just in terms of where we still need to do some work, either that we knew about in the beginning or we learned as we got more into the project?
I think one thing that has been really essential was about maybe 2 years ago, the district recognized there were some things in our data management system that needed to be refreshed in a certain sense. So we get so used to our student management system. And like our iPhones, every day there's updates, there's changes to the practices and procedures, and to really look at how we are managing our data within our student management system and how we are educating members of our faculty and staff who use the system every day to access that. So the district was very supportive, and the board was very supportive of doing a reinvigoration plan to really look at our student management system, to spend time with consultants to make sure that we are maintaining our data in the best way possible. I think that was what was also really good about this process is what was to say some of the things that, as the director of technology and the person that's leading data, to me it's wonderful, but to others it may not be as wonderful, and to really try to find programs that are going to meet the needs of the leaders that are in the districts and the parents and the students that are accessing it. The playbook is a great tool because it really is helping me understand what the needs are. And when I go out or my team goes out to acquire technology, how is it going to integrate with our larger system? Am I going to be sending my end users off to various places to get this information? Is there a way that I can house this information in one place so that I can assist them in building support for the student. So I definitely think it's still a work in progress. I'm just glad that the need for this work is appreciated by our leadership team, and hopefully this perfect program that hopefully it exists, because if it does, we're going to find it and implement it.
If I could just chime in real fast, because I want to underscore something Onyx is touching on that's really important. And that is, every district in the country, for the most part, has a student management system in place. And it's one of those things that just lies in the background that, you implement when you launch it, and then it kind of just sits there. And this is how people go and get their information. And what we did was identify the fact that there was a need. We had people coming to us, we had people retiring, we had people changing roles, and we needed to spend the resources to reinvigorate the entire district to become more accustomed to new features in the data management system, updates in the software, again, in the spirit of trying to be really efficient and not to fall victim of making assumptions because it's a system we always had. Therefore, everyone must know how to use it. And we know that's not true, right? There are users that are much more equipped, have the capacity to really dive deep into the management system where others don't. And then I just want to quickly go back to a previous question around, what are the things that we're doing? And Sara touched on this notion of pockets of excellence. And so when we roll out and ultimately launch the data culture for the upcoming school year, it's really important that we help our community to see that we're not just scrapping things that we used to do, but we're building on things that were successful. So, we talk to our leaders in very formal ways or lack thereof. And sometimes there is a real good reason why there isn't any progress, but we expect our leaders to know why there's not a teacher and a student in the hallway where the student was breaking down his data from the quarter and engaging in goal setting with the teacher. So again, we have these pockets that we want to build on, and we want to make it ubiquitous. We want to have a common understanding, a common language around how we use data in the district, how we talk about data in the district, and move away from what seems to be pretty common all across the country. And that is, there's not a short of data. I think that's the struggle, is that there's a lot of it. So the real question is, how are we helping teachers and leaders identify the right data source to use and when, where to go? What are some critical questions they could be asking themselves as they're analyzing? And then using that data to be extremely responsive to the needs of the school. So again, so that way we're making progress.
Yeah. I think a lot of what, we're hearing from all of you really is this idea of what culture means. I think even using the term data culture, sometimes, people don't associate data with that, like thinking about values and beliefs and the language even. Are we using consistent language to mean things across the district? Ed, I want to come to you first for this next question, because, and then back to you, Roberto. But from where you both sit, for the region that Newburgh's in, it is a relatively large district compared to some of your counterparts that neighbor you. And I think that's why you see these pockets of excellence, right? There's this teacher doing this incredible thing with student ownership and data, and you want to figure out how to scale that when you are serving different neighborhoods and different schools. One of the first decisions that we made together was this idea of assembling what we decided to call a Vanguard team. We were very, proud of ourselves for being clever, because Vanguard means like going first with a new initiative, but really it was meant to mean something. These were people who were going to champion this idea of a new data culture, push it forward. And Ed, would love to hear from you. How did you even make decisions about, who should join that data culture Vanguard team? And maybe in addition to that, what advice would you give to a leader listening to this who wants to create their own sort of data culture team?
Yeah, there was a lot of reflection that occurred as we thought about the Vanguard team. One of the things that we have to remember was this whole project is building a data culture. This isn't imposing a data culture. This is about making sure that the voices of the individuals that have to use the data to make decisions are included in the design. So we had to take a look at who are the representative stakeholders in our district that we expect to use a variety of different data sources to inform decisions. So when you're thinking about a student, you have families, so we needed parents to be involved. We had teachers, and it wasn't just one type of teacher from an elementary, one from a middle school. It was a variety of different teachers that represent different courses of study and different approaches to specific needs of students, the different subgroups of teachers, of students that are served, and the teachers that serve them, the administration at each of the different levels, and the social emotional learning teams, the pupil personnel services staff, all those individuals that kind of make up the whole child. And as we build and create the data culture in the district, Sara mentioned the design of a playbook. You don't have one playbook. It's ever changing. So we have to include the voices of all of those different people in the design of the playbook for this period of time, and then it has to be revisited throughout the process to ensure that the playbook that we have is meeting the needs of each of those individual stakeholders that are on our Vanguard team. You talk about, in the previous question, you mentioned what are some of the things that we had in place. Well, we have in language, we have professional learning communities in each of our buildings. But what happens during those professional learning communities, and what could happen a little bit better in those learning communities if we were to develop a data culture from within, using the voices of our educators across the district, using the voices of our students and our families. That's a really unique opportunity we have for common planning time to occur in our buildings and to be used for that particular purpose. So the Vanguard team is really representative of the student population, and its intended purpose was to kind of give us a real picture of what is the landscape of data in the district as we speak. Because as senior staff members, we can think we know what's happening in schools and the way it's happening, but if we don't talk to the practitioners to get the real on the front line picture, we're missing the point. And you can't build a data culture without those voices. It just won't work.
Yeah. I think something you said, Ed, is really key for anybody when they're designing any type of experience in education, and probably outside of that too. But it's the idea of the people who are most impacted need to be a part of the decisions around how you design that. And that's really what the Vanguard team was meant to be. I know we heard from a few teachers even saying, it's really awesome to have these opportunities to work alongside the deputy superintendent, alongside the superintendent, alongside this executive director that I wouldn't have opportunities to work alongside with. And we didn't just hear that in one direction. We heard that in both ways. Dr. Padilla, I think a few times you were like, I just want to keep talking to this teacher about their experience. So would want to ask you maybe the same question. How did you make decisions about who would be on your data culture Vanguard team? And what advice would you have for leaders who might want to assemble sort of their own team around making decisions around data?
Yeah, so I hope our audience walks away with a clear picture about how we're living to the vision and mission of the school district. And that is, we strive to be inclusive. And we recognize that if we're going to bring about substantial change, that is good for everyone in the organization, that we need to make sure their voices are represented. And quite frankly, we do a good job of that. We're not a top-down organization. It's not who we are. It's not the kind of culture we're trying to create. But we bring a lot of people to the table. We have a number of different advisories, a number of different committees, number of different task forces, design teams, a Vanguard team. There's a plethora of opportunities for people to get involved. And here's what's unique. It's getting involved to have a district-wide impact. And to me, that's a leadership opportunity we consistently afford our faculty and staff. So they're not only just impacting their classroom or their school, the decisions they're making and the collaboration they're involved in affords them an opportunity to hear someone who works in a different building on the other side of town, and they're kind of struggling with the same challenge. And they come together, they shoulder up, and they put their best ideas forward, and they get those ideas critiqued, and they get their ideas built upon, So that way it ultimately benefits the entire district. And I love that about our district, is that we're super inclusive. We try to represent as many stakeholders as we can. And there's just always a number of opportunities where people can get involved. So we have a mechanism in place whereby we work with our bargaining units. We worked with various principals to identify those individuals who are kind of thirsty. They want to get involved. They're looking for new experiences. And we ask for them to come forward so that way we can find a place for them on a number of different design teams or advisories, et cetera, that I already mentioned, where they can have a stake. And what I like to say, put their prints on the direction of the district.
Now, one of the reasons I'm so glad we asked this question is I think data tends to be one of those things that we feel like belongs in one place in the district. It belongs with a team of experts, with researchers, with our information office. And part of our data culture work is we want to send this message that everyone belongs in a data culture, because data is power, and we want to distribute that power to our end users, which at the end of the day are our students. And so I think you guys have done an exceptional job of bringing all different voices to the table and building out what this next vision of data culture looks like. And on that same note, I think this next question is actually my favorite one, because I think we've had a lot of kind of pleasant surprises and ahas. But in Onyx, I'll come to you first, but I think it'd be great to hear from each of you that have a thought on this. But the question is, what's been a surprising insight for you or an aha moment during this process?
I think as the data person in the district, there's times where, you sometimes think that people don't have this desire, right? You have the data, the dreaded data conversation. But what was a great insight in our home is that, our teachers are really, and our staff are really desiring this work. They want to do this work. And it was great to see the different ideas and understanding that many of them had, that this would empower students and families and have a greater impact on our overall community. So it was great to hear that as we were thinking about building a sustainable culture that was accessible, and how it could really bring about a great change for our district. So it definitely was very inspiring being a part of it, and building and continuing to build this framework.
I agree with you. That was a pleasant surprise for me too. I think people feel a certain way about data, especially when it comes to data about kids and schools. And so just the amount of people on the Vanguard team that got really excited about this work was really exciting and inspiring. What about the rest of the panel? Any surprising insights for you or aha moments you want to share?
I'll share. So one thing is the fact that everyone can have a seat at the table when you make the time and the space for it. Right? That was mind-blowing, because we often complain, as Dr. Padilla said earlier, about the fact that we don't have enough time. Well, how do we repurpose our time, and how do we invite others into our space and make this work? Well, we did it. And that was just so awesome. And then the other piece that absolutely blew my mind was the playbook. I can't speak enough about it. And I think that what really blew my mind was the fact that it was amazing to see how many layers and layers of conversation regarding alignment and equity and inclusion and sustainability all of a sudden came together and converged in a really tangible way to reinvigorate and excite us on the use of data and how it's going to reach every corner of our community.
Yeah, I kind of touched on it already, but I was so impressed and encouraged each time I was in a small group and just listen to the discourse that was taking place, where it started from how scary data is, to this is the right thing to be doing right now, and just to see the level of discourse and passion around it was a pleasant surprise. You know, I kind of knew how people generally felt about it, but I left very encouraged on how much they collaborated with each other and presented ideas and built off each other's thoughts.
I love that. So one of our final questions, I think it's one thing that struck me in our early conversations around doing this work is right off the bat, I think, Ed, it was probably you who said, this is not a one-year project, right? Like this is a long-term commitment that we're making in the same way that we would say this is a 5-year strategic vision. Like we are committing to data culture in that way as well. And we're also naming that it's not something that we're going to fix in this first year. And so I think the video is very celebratory. There's a lot of really awesome lessons that we can gather from you. But we also know there's a lot of work to be done. Sara, you talked a little bit about the playbook. That's something that we know is not in the place where we want to roll it out just yet, but we know that it can be this really powerful, valuable tool. And so just want to acknowledge that you all said from the beginning, this is a long-term commitment that we're making as a district. It's not an initiative that we're bringing forward that we're going to sort of drop after a while. This is something we're saying is going to be really transformative. And so to that end, one of the last questions that we wanted to ask every one of you, but want to start with you, Ed, if that's okay, is just thinking about this future state of data or data culture in Newburgh. What do you hope that is? What do you hope it looks like? What do you hope people say? What do you hope the culture is in the district?
One of the things that we've started is to really focus on what's called a scorecard. And each individual senior staff member has a scorecard, and it's how well are we doing? And it's not using it as an accountability measure, it's more of an impact measure. So how do you know you're making a difference? So in the work that I do on a daily basis with my team, how do I know that the work that we're doing is making a difference? And when you think about the data culture project, that's kind of a shift in mindset. It's not just thinking that we did something right and hoping that we did something right. It's knowing that we did something right. And more importantly, if you're not doing something right, how do you adjust your practice so that you adjust it to the needs of the individuals you're seeking to change? We see that and transfer that into the entire data culture project in terms of alignment. So how are we doing school improvement plans in the schools and using the data that's being gleaned from that and connecting it to the data that's being discussed at the grade level team meetings and at the faculty meetings, and putting all the pieces together so that we're all shooting towards that one target and that we're all gaining and accessing improvements on a scorecard that we all connect and work together to succeed. So my hope is that we don't build a data culture and a playbook for today. We cultivate a data culture that is ever changing based on the needs of the student population and based on the capacity of our staff on an ongoing basis. And we're responsive to that. And we're receptive to that. Every year you may have a different group of educators coming into your district. Well, you have to really understand what their needs are and what's their capacity to do the work that we're asking them to do, and be responsive to providing them with that technical assistance and support. So I think for me, my hope is that we continue to watch the data to make the shifts and changes that are needed to best serve the kids.
Yeah, I think that's right on. That's one of the reasons why when we say data culture, we always add that word responsive, because the one thing that this year has taught us is conditions change and data changes, population shifts, attendance, enrollment shifts, and all of that is useful data for us. So what are we doing with that information? Sara, what about you? I feel like you've had so many different roles within Newburgh, so you can speak to this in a variety of ways, but what do you hope is the future of data in Newburgh?
So when I think of the future of data in Newburgh, I really focus on the scholars and their families, right? Because those are the focal point for us. And so with regard to the scholars, I believe we envision that they will fully own their learning at all grade levels, as early as pre-K. They can start in their own way to own who they are and where they're headed. And then with regard to the families, I believe that the future is about them asking questions, equipping them so that they can ask questions that are going to further stretch our thinking to continue to innovate new and exciting resources for everyone in the community.
Sara. Onyx, what about you? What do you hope is the future of data?
I concur, and I'm, with a lot of what Sara said, but I also think that what my hope is for the future is that we have systems that are efficient, that are accessible to our staff and our students and our families, our scholars and our families, and that we have professional learning conversations about data that are not just about accountability, but are about improving our instruction, about building interventions, that it's not ever intimidating conversations to look at your students' progress or your class's progress and try to pivot when you need to pivot instructionally, and just to have that comfort level on a building level and a district level to have conversations around data, and that those conversations just inspire change within our school buildings daily.
Thanks, Onyx. And Roberto, we're going to give you the last word on this one. Sort of as the final arbiter in the district, as the final person making decisions, what do you hope to see sort of shift in the future state of data culture?
Yeah, there's really not much to add. I mean, my team kind of summed it up really well, but I'll just include, I really don't want accountability and data to be dirty words. We talk about impact a lot. We ask that question of ourselves and of each other. What's the impact of that initiative? What's the impact of that choice, etc.? And so in the spirit of being responsive and in the spirit of looking at ways to be more efficient, data needs to be timely. It needs to be dynamic. And my hope is we don't spend the amount of time we have been on presenting the data, but where we really spend our time is on the analysis, on the story, on the strategy. I think those are the next steps for us. And that's what excites me about this work that we're doing.
Yeah, it is really exciting to hear you guys talk about your vision for the future. And as we've mentioned, the energy around this work has been really inspiring. We're just going to take, I think, another minute just to say thank you and kind of close out here. We're certainly grateful to everyone who watched this conversation live, and of course, immensely grateful to those of you that joined the panel today. It's, as Gabby mentioned at the top, it's one thing for us to talk about data culture and the work that we believe in. It's another thing for district leaders to talk about what it actually looks like in your district. I think there's a lot of takeaways for me as someone who has been kind of promoting this work over the past year, and hearing you all talk about it. That's been really inspiring. But I think it all comes back to what we believe to be true about data, which you just talked about, Dr. Padilla, and we saw that in the video too. That someone in the video said, I think currently in our district, people think data and think punitive, that it's something that's going to get me in trouble. And when we define a culture, we talk about how beliefs around data are such a big part of what defines that culture. And so, as we think about the future, what the future holds for this work, I really hope it does shift people's beliefs around what data is and what it can be used for. And so much of that comes down to the practices that you all are talking about in your district, and the kind of work that you're hoping to promote, and the kinds of just things that they believe about the power that comes with data and how it can be used to improve educational experiences for all kids. So again, just thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us today and with the audience. We are happy to continue this conversation. We hope that you will reach out to us if you're watching this and have questions and want to talk through those. We, of course, love this topic and would be happy to continue it. So just want to say a general thank you again for everyone who is here. We hope you keep talking about data culture. We look forward to next time. Thanks again.
Thank you.